This is where the story begins. A broken man, an empty road, and no way back. Inside the RV, Walter records a message, already fearing this may be his last day. Before Heisenberg, he was just Walter White, a chemistry teacher no one respected. He explained the beauty of science to students who barely looked up from their desks. After school, humiliation continued at the car wash, where even adults looked down on him. Then came the diagnosis, terminal lung cancer, and the clock suddenly started ticking. In the mirror, Walter saw not a man living, but a man who had already disappeared. At a family gathering, Hank seemed everything Walter was not: loud, bold, untouchable. One DEA ride-along opened Walter's eyes to a hidden world built on risk and money. And from that world came Jesse Pinkman, a former student running from his own mess. Walter found Jesse and made a choice that would change both of their lives forever. In the desert, teacher and dropout stood together, united by desperation and need. Walter bought supplies like a scientist, but for the first time, not for a classroom. Inside the RV, chemistry became something darker, more valuable, and far more dangerous. When the blue crystals appeared, Walter realized his talent could finally command power. Jesse saw product, Walter saw proof that he was exceptional in a world that ignored him. Their first deals pulled them into a brutal underworld where weakness meant extinction. Violence ruled that world, and Walter quickly learned fear alone would never protect him. Yet when he counted the cash, something deeper stirred: pride, control, and possibility. Then came the birth of a name. Heisenberg entered the room, and everyone listened. Back home, Walter stared at the money like it was both salvation and corruption. He told himself every lie he needed. This was for his family, not for himself. But hiding the cash meant hiding the truth, and both became easier with time. Jesse spiraled under the pressure, while Walter grew colder, sharper, more certain. Night after night, the road into the desert became Walter's road into another self. Out there, far from suburbia, he could build an empire, one cook at a time. Each deal tested him, but each success made fear feel smaller and power feel natural. Soon, Walter no longer negotiated like a teacher. He spoke like a man in command. Then came Gus Fring, a man who hid ruthlessness behind manners and perfect control. Gus recognized in Walter something rare: genius, discipline, and dangerous ambition. What began in a fast food chain led Walter into a far larger criminal machine. Beneath the surface, he discovered the super lab, a kingdom built for his chemistry. In that lab, Walter finally found the respect the world had denied him for years. Surrounded by steel and precision, he no longer felt small. He felt necessary. And Gus watched carefully, knowing brilliance can be useful, but never truly obedient. Alone in the shadows, Walter began to understand how much he liked becoming feared. In silence, behind the wheel, he wrestled with a truth he could not confess. Every return home felt stranger, as if Walter White no longer fully lived there. Family photos reminded him what he was losing, but not enough to make him stop. The hat and glasses were not a disguise anymore. They were a declaration of identity. Cook after cook, Walter refined more than product. He refined the man he was becoming. The lab became a throne room where his brilliance finally translated into authority. Gus remained calm, but the balance was changing. Walter no longer accepted being managed. His hands stayed steady in the lab, even as his life outside it came apart. The blue crystals became his signature, his mark, his proof that he was unmatched. Every descent underground felt symbolic, as if he entered a deeper part of himself. Long corridors and silent concrete mirrored the isolation growing inside Walter's mind. Even simple conversations carried tension now, because trust had become a liability. At night, dressed as Heisenberg, Walter moved with the confidence he once envied. Across tables from killers, he no longer looked like prey, he looked like a threat. In the desert, men stepped carefully around him, sensing something had changed forever. Yet alone in motel rooms, he still counted money like a man chasing control. In the mirror again, he saw what fear had built. Not weakness, but determination. Chemistry once brought order to chaos. Now it helped him weaponize chaos itself. Surrounded by barrels and chemicals, Walter kept moving deeper into moral darkness. On rooftops above the city, he stood like a king no one was meant to see. But power always carries paranoia, and every shadow started to look like a threat. Around Gus, every calm silence felt like strategy, calculation, and quiet intimidation. Walter admired the perfection of his work, but pride had already become addiction. Heisenberg was no longer survival. He was ego, myth, and the thrill of dominance. By now, Walter was driving forward not because he had to, but because he chose to. Explosions and destruction followed him, proof that every line had already been crossed. He moved through danger with purpose, adapting faster than anyone expected possible. Deals became performances, and Walter learned that intimidation could be as useful as force. Gus saw the truth clearly. Walter was brilliant, but brilliance without restraint becomes chaos. In the lab, production soared, and so did Walter's belief that the Empire needed him. Each ride down the elevator felt like entering the machinery of his own legend. The faster events moved, the more Walter trusted only himself and his decisions. Empty industrial spaces mirrored the emptiness left where his conscience used to be. With a remote in hand, he proved he could control fear as expertly as chemistry. Jesse was falling apart, but Walter kept pushing, because the machine had to keep going. His relationship with Gus turned into a cold war between patience and unchecked ego. Once the alarm started, there was no room left for caution or compromise. Fire tore through the old order, and Walter emerged from the wreckage transformed again. Watching the flames from a distance, he looked less like a survivor than an architect. At the dinner table, he sat with his family as if separated by invisible glass. Alone with the hat in his hands, he knew consequences were closing in from all sides. Still, in the darkness, Heisenberg walked on, because stopping meant facing himself. Even ruins could not humble him. He saw destruction and called it necessary progress. At the peak of his power, Walter seemed untouchable, but power had already hollowed him. Dawn in the desert should have felt like renewal, but for Walter, it felt like debt. Over coffee and headlines, he searched for control in a world slipping from his hands. Even routine stops became loaded with suspicion. Paranoia had become second nature. In secret workshops, he built solutions the way others build weapons or prayers. Every hallway, every door, every bag in hand suggested a man preparing for war. His partnership with Jesse had once been practical. Now it was damaged, personal, tragic. Jesse sat surrounded by profit and poison, living proof of Walter's destructive influence. Out on the road at night, Heisenberg seemed powerful, but Walter felt increasingly alone. Surrounded by armed men, he stayed calm because fear had become everyone else's burden. In abandoned factories, he moved like a ghost through the empire he had contaminated. From above the city, the scale of his rise looked impressive and completely empty. At home with the television on, silence revealed how little normal life remained. Meanwhile, the investigation tightened, and Hank was getting closer to the truth than ever. The hidden money proved Walter had won the game he first entered to survive. But every mile on the road now carried the weight of exposure, regret, and loss. Chases across the desert showed how violent the empire had become under his shadow. In the snowy cabin, Walter finally had money, time, and absolute isolation. Each step through the snow felt like punishment, exile for the man he created. Alone by lamplight, he had nothing left to command except memory and regret. Holding the hat in the frozen air, he faced the cost of becoming Heisenberg. Yet even after exile, something in him refused to disappear quietly into the cold. Behind the wheel again, determination returned, darker and sharper than before. Back in the desert, Walter moved with the resolve of a man writing his own ending. He approached the final battleground knowing there would be no future beyond these doors. Inside the corridor, every step echoed like judgment, consequence, and inevitability. Surrounded once more by armed men, Walter entered not as prey, but as executioner. His final plan showed the same mind that made him great and destroyed him. In seconds, chaos erupted, and the Empire answered to its creator one last time. Through the smoke and wreckage, Walter moved like a man already halfway gone. Then he sat down, not in triumph, but in the quiet after irreversible choices. Exhausted, wounded, and fading, he walked through the remains of what he built. The machines around him were familiar, almost comforting, like relics of his true devotion. In the empty lab, Walter was finally alone with the thing he loved most, his work. He touched the blue crystal gently, as if saying goodbye to his brilliance and his curse. Sinking to the floor, he looked less like a king than a man stripped to truth. One last glance across the room said what words never could: this was always about him. And there, beneath cold lights, Walter White's story came to its final stillness. The lab remained, humming softly, as if the world would keep moving without him. Broken glass and silence told the story better than any confession ever could. Walter became Heisenberg for money at first, but stayed for power, pride, and identity.